except the Lord build the house. They labor in vain that build it, and except the Lord keep the city, the watchman waketh but in vain. I was also in Acts chapter 5, where men were plotting to try to stop the spreading of the gospel. And in verse 38 and 39 it says, "And now I say unto you, refrain from these men and let them alone. For if this counsel or this work be of men, it will come to naught. But if it be of God, you cannot overthrow it, lest haply you be found even to fight against God." I want to welcome you this evening. It's just been a pleasure to see friends from the past, teachers from the past, and those who presently are active at CCS. And we just want to invite you to enjoy this evening to see what God has ordained and what He has blessed. Thank you so much for coming. This time I'd like to ask Mrs. Ivy and Jim, my husband, to come to the platform, and I believe Kirk Jackson. I might say this is an exciting evening because I didn't plan any of it, and so everything's new, and we're going to wait and see what happens.
Good evening again. I want to take a few moments to ask some questions about the early beginning of CCS. Now, like I said, I was there in '86. I remember going down that second hallway. I remember that beautiful, beautiful brown carpet. Miss O, I have a little bit of a memory, but tell us, how did CCS begin?
I probably have a smaller memory than you, but I remember there was just a group of people that felt like we were supposed to start an independent Christian school, and we came together and met at a restaurant in Moore, a very informal meeting, and decided that's what God would have us to do. Jim and I then proceeded to drive different places all over Norman and Moore. We drove up in the parking lot of where we currently reside, and I looked at Jim and I said, "This is where we're supposed to be." He said, "How do you know?" And I said, "I don't know, but this is where we're supposed to be." Went and saw the real estate people. He said, "Lady, you're crazy. We don't sell a third of a building." I said, "You do if God's in it." And that's how we began.
Now, I know that being in teaching, especially Christian education, you're flush with cash.
Amen.
Mr. Roosevelt, of course, I remember you being that constant fixture. See, Miss O, here's Mr. O. Mm-hmm. But tell us, how did you actually come by the funding to actually get CCS started?
Well, first of all, it's really important to let you know the reason Ms. Fillmore took you home was because the other alternative was to take you to her house, and that wasn't going to happen.
Right. Oh, I'm very aware of that.
No, Barbara's already mentioned that the people that own the building agreed to sell 1/3 of it, and they told us they would sell it if we would come up with $50,000 down payment. This was in June or July already, and school was supposed to start in September. And we were a bunch of poor people, so we hit up everybody we knew for loans, gifts, whatever they could do. And after we'd exhausted all our resources, we had $20,000. I called a man that I knew that could loan us the $30,000 that we needed. He at first told me no. About 10 minutes later, he called back and said, "You've sounded a little desperate. I think I'll do it." And so we went up to, he lived in McPherson, Kansas. We went up to see him, and I said, "Ray, what do you want for paperwork for this $30,000? He said, "Well, you're going to pay me back, aren't you?" I said, "Well, we intend to." He said, "Well, that's all I need to know." So we basically borrowed the last $30,000 on a handshake and came up with the $50,000, and about 2 or 3 weeks later, school started.
Okay. The Lord provides.
Yes, He does.
Miss Ivy, how did you get involved with CCS?
Well, I was one of those people that Mrs. Roosevelt talked about that began to realize that God desired to see an independent Christian school start. And I had already taught with her previously at another school, and we were neighbors. We'd known each other for, at that time, a number of years. And so when this came about, naturally, I wanted to be a part of this. And it was exciting to start a brand new school, totally independent. I think at that time, we were probably one of the, if maybe the first school that would venture out like this and to try to do this independent of anybody else's support. So it was an exciting adventure to listen to God and to follow Him.
So, Miss O, you know, I come back today and I see CCS. I see this wonderful facility. I remember our home games being at Hillsdale. I remember the brown carpet. I remember only that third of a building. How many teachers came on board with you that first year to teach?
We were counting that up. And counting the music teacher, I believe there were 9 of us. We had kindergarten, preschool. We went through 9th grade. Mrs. Weimer and I were the 7th, 8th, and 9th grade teachers. Every hour they'd change class. They either had me, Mrs. Weimer, or me. So I think we had a total. We had no custodial. We signed up to do the bathrooms. We signed up. We vacuumed our own rooms. We cleaned everything. We did everything. We tried a bus route, and that was one of the funniest things. But we had about 9 teachers and an old school bus. And when that school bus would break down, which was about 3 mornings out of 5, we had an alert system. Mrs. Weimer, Mrs. Ivy, Mrs. Stevens, Mrs. Anybody that had a car that could handle more than 2 kids, we went and picked up kids and brought them to school. So those 9 teachers were very busy people.
And of course, you know, those 9 teachers, of course, doing it all. Exactly how many millions did you promise them to come teach for you?
7,000. I believe we promised them 7, but we had to cut it to 6,000.
Okay. So $6,000. If that's not a commitment to invest in people's lives, I don't know what is, because that can barely cover. I mean, people would want to take a job today for $6,000. I guess if you're called to God, you absolutely would. Mrs. Ivy, what type of positions, where have you been involved in CCS?
Let's see. When I first started, I was in 6th grade. I've taught 1st and 2nd grade combination that we did 1 year. I've taught in 8th grade. I also went to 3rd grade, and whenever I went to 3rd grade, after several years, because that was when the school was growing, and we had more than one 3rd grade. Mrs. Fillmore was the 3rd grade teacher, and I had the other 3rd grade. And then at that point, when the school was really taking off and growing, Mrs. Osfeld approached me about becoming an assistant principal. And so since I have been assistant principal, and I have forgotten how many years that has been, so it seems like forever almost. But we've, at that point, she and I both stay in the classroom still. Even today, we're still teaching, and think it's very important to stay connected with the students. And so for the last number of years, I've done science or Bible. And this year, currently, besides being assistant principal, a Bible teacher. So.
Wonderful. The most important subject that we can teach. So, Mr. O, like I said, you know, growing up, I mean, you saw one, you saw the other. And I know, of course, you worked full time. You were a busy man. But what, you know, you volunteered or you were volunteered? I'm not sure which. For so many construction projects. Any of them really stick out in your mind as your favorite? Or
well. For those of you that may wonder how impromptu this is, Kirk said he was going to ask us a couple of questions and gave us an idea. He said he was going to ask about projects, not just construction projects.
Oh, yes.
My very first project that I was volunteered for was girls basketball coach. I see Gina Gale, it was Gale, I'm sorry Gina, I don't know what it is now. I think that may be the only one here that has had the privilege of having me for their basketball coach. But it should make every parent here proud to have Michelle McNear here. It's an experience that no one should have to suffer more than just 2 or 3 years, which is what I did. But as far as construction projects, we started out with the north third of the building, which is the elementary side now. I don't know how many years it was. We bought the rest of the building, but we only remodeled the middle third, which is the high school now. We got possession of the building the 1st of August, and it was the gymnastic chalet. None of the walls were there except the walls that are around Ms. Colwell's room now. A bunch of volunteer laborers remodeled, put up all the walls, did the wiring, sheetrocking, taping and bedding. Raymond Skrapka was an invaluable part of that. We did it all, and we did it all in 4 weeks. And I think everybody that worked on it worked full time, but we would come after work. We would work until we couldn't work anymore and go home and rest a few hours, go to work and come back and do it all over the next night. And if any of you are interested, I'll tell you about the very last night, but they said to keep it short, so that'll be a different time. So.
All right. Are there any other thoughts, reflections that you would like to tell us about this evening? All right.
Can I do it and keep it short?
Yes.
Real short. Several of the teachers mentioned the Christian aspect of the school, and I think that's the most important part. Being Mr. O, I hear a lot about what goes on at the school. I hear a lot of the names, I hear the problems, but what I like the most is when Barbara comes home and tells me, I had somebody in my office today, and before they left, they called on the Lord. I don't know how many times that's happened, but for all the problems that we've had, difficult times that we've been through, just a few of those times make up for it all.